and welcome back to another episode of Walking the Blooming Path with Rosebud and Sprout. I'm your spiritual host, Rosie, and this is my co-host, Jay.
Have you guys ever walked away from a conversation feeling like you swallowed the truth, or your real thoughts got stuck somewhere between your heart and your lips? Or maybe you bit your tongue just to keep the peace?
Heck yeah.
Today, we're talking about the throat.
Today we are talking about the throat. I can tell you definitely I've used all of these, if not once, but several times in my life, where I have demonstrated times when my throat chakra was stuck. And I like these questions that you ask because they're real thought-provoking questions. They're great intros to understanding how we utilize the throat chakra. I am super excited to be here today and to talk about this particular episode. This is episode number...
This is the fifth episode
into the series of From Root to Crown. And this series we cover the chakras going from the root to obviously the bottom, working our way up the system, getting to understand what each chakra hold. We utilize it within our daily lives. I'm also super excited because this particular episode is coming out around the time where I'm starting my chakra program that I have going on, which I'm super excited about. I have a bunch of beautiful participants in this program, understanding how to coexist per se with the chakra systems and our everyday experiences. So I'm super glad I had to give a little shout out there.
Always. One
story in particular that comes to my mind on times that I've walked away from conversations has to always do with the workplace. There was one time I was working for an employer and I went to him to ask him a question about something. He immediately got angry with me and basically started diminishing my work. I don't really exactly remember what took place for him to kind of attack me like that, but I said nothing and I walked away. In normal circumstances, we look at that and we say to ourselves, oh, that's great. You were courageous enough not to sink yourself to his level, create this drama or create this experience. You were able to show that you were the bigger person. That's true. But one of the things I learned about doing that is that is a form of working with the throat chakra. When we restrict ourselves from expression, we tend to put that system out of balance, meaning that it's not quite sure what direction it needs to go into. Does it need to flow up? Does it need to flow down? Does it need to receive or does it need to release? It's really important to understand that when we restrict this particular chakra from expression, it does a number of things to our physical health as well as manifesting things into the other systems as well.
What you're trying to tell me is I should talk back to my bosses.
Well, what I'm trying to tell you is that you need to understand that, yes, it is a form of confidence, but the confidence comes from where? We learned this earlier when we talked about the solar plex chakra. In the solar plex chakra, that's the fire, that's the desire, that's the passion to make something actually physically take place in your life. When that system gets activated, it's only natural for the other parts of the system to get activated as well, because now we're starting to incorporate the rest of the system. And so when we're looking at the upper part of the system that holds the higher consciousness, the higher self, and we're looking at the throat chakra, when we restrict expression, it's going to sit back into the solar plex. It depends on how that makes you feel. If it makes you feel like you've restricted and this is a childhood trauma that you need to go back and resolve in your sacral chakra, that's a completely different story. But if it's a restriction because you've actually built confidence within yourself to hold your tongue, then that is a form of expression as well. It doesn't always need to come out in the form of sound, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Yeah. I'm glad that you actually went back to explain that, because if you are connected with yourself and you understand who you are, holding your tongue or not saying what you need to say, for instance, with us, is the least amount of suffering. And if this is going to cause some sort of suffering for somebody, you hold that back, and that's a form of your expression. my expression is going back and reflecting in me, is what I'm going to say actually going to benefit anybody, or is it just a judgmental type of phrase?
Right.
And so you don't say certain things because you're like, oh, it's just my ego talking. I don't need to be saying anything here. I feel for them because if they're attacking me for any reason, I don't need to be attacking back, right?
Right.
Just because you need to express yourself. That's not a form of expression. You can balance your chakras in other ways. Go home, take a shower, and sing. Express yourself through song or through art. Write a very activism-oriented blog at 2 o'clock in the morning and post it accidentally.
Oh, well, it's there.
It's there, out in the universe. Somebody's reading it, somebody saw it, and somebody's probably not agreeing to it, and they are using their throat chakra at their computer right now.
Right. The computer's filling it. It's filling the energy that's being excreted from this throat chakra because it needs to express itself. Absolutely. Well, some of the other things that we need to look at when we dissecting or understanding the throat chakra is, what is it affecting? Human beings have the most beautiful way of communication, not only through sound, but we can actually hold a conversation, which then implants information into your brain. And the more you do that, the smarter you become, the more you understand how to utilize your system. With that understanding, you to see what part the throat chakra affects. So one, it does affect the throat. One of the things you can notice right away is when we're having an imbalance or we're having a restriction. Sometimes you're going to feel physical pain or burning sensation in that throat chakra, almost as if you were holding your breath through the throat. Have you ever experienced that?
The one that gets me is the one right before you want to cry, and it hurts right in the throat.
Right.
Even though the tears are coming out of your eyes, throat has that, what they call the lump in your throat.
The lump in the throat. Yes.
Right? Yeah. That's, I think, the form of restricting that throat chakra.
Right. I guess that's what I was trying to explain, but I didn't explain it right.
That's the only way I can explain it. I've had it when I've wanted to say something back, and then your brain just kind of shuts off. You can't think anymore, so you don't say anything.
Right.
And then the minute they walk away, you're like, ooh, I would have had such a good one, right?
If I only would have said,
if I only had a brain. That one when you're watching something really sappy, and you're about to, cry, and that lump just sits there and it kind of burns in your throat.
That right there is your throat chakra being activated. Now, what that activation looks like for you depends on what the response is going to be from that initial activation. So like in the sense that Jay's using, you're watching this happy movie, it's making you tear up. You don't want to tear up, so you're holding that energy in that throat chakra. So what happens if you release it? What happens when you say, screw it, let's let that go?
Then you sound like Sadness from, God, I don't even remember
from
Inside Out, just crying.
Right. And sometimes that form of release also is a form of expression. And so we have to understand that when we are utilizing the throat chakra, we have to know the parts that it mainly affects the throat. Now let's look at some of the other areas that the throat chakra affects. It affects the sinuses, the ears. Let's look at that from a moment. In the ENT world, where I'm very familiar with, the ears, nose, and throat sector of healthcare, they have a specific structure that they follow. One is if somebody's having an imbalance in their throat, they're going to check their ears because it's connected. What's going on with their ears? Maybe they have an ear infection that's now maybe starting to dip in and create a throat infection. If somebody comes in with sinuses or like really bad pressure in their sinuses, what are they going to do? They're going to check their throat. Why do we check the throat? To see, well, is there any redness? Is there any irritation? Is there any indication of like postnasal drip or something like that? So they're looking for these identifiers, these markers, because this area is all affected by this one energy source. So when you're born, like me, deficiency already in the physical form that is giving you obstacles,
like your ears,
like my ears and hearing. Those are obstacles. I can sometimes then say something like, "Oh, what did you say? Here's what I heard." And then there's the understanding that there's a miscommunication because I can't hear very well.
Like anything, right? If you were born without sight, your hearing usually goes up. If you were born without sound, your eyesight's much better. And in your case, can't really listen right, and so you talk and talk and talk.
Rude. That's all I have to say. It's just rude.
But no. We're talking about ears and throat and sinuses. I mean, have overactive sinuses, but in this case, I think it's a lot about ears and throat, right? Ears and throat, all of that is connected. That whole canal is there. Listening is part of it. It's part of the throat chakra.
Absolutely.
Listening is part of expressing. Sometimes helps you hear somebody else's truth, and now it can affect what comes out next.
Absolutely. Because once you start engaging that interaction between throat chakras or between chakra systems within one another, you start to create a bond. You start to create a interconnectionness that's that unsilent, that nobody talks about because it's not seen, right? When we create these things, we have to understand that they go deeper too, right? Let's use the throat chakra as a form of expression. Let's say you don't have a problem with that knot in the throat. You can bypass it and go straight through and be able to express whatever you want. I've heard this terminology being used, I just speak what's on my mind. No problem. There's nothing wrong with that. But here's where we need to challenge ourselves first before we start challenging one another, and how we use the throat chakra in expression. If I come to you and I have something that maybe has made me angry or uncomfortable and I need to address it with you, I normally have a lot of issues starting conflicting conversations because my prior demonstration and experience was to reach anger. Because anger was so deeply embedded into my system, it is something that I still work on and still struggle with to this day to work with instead of against, right? So there are times I have to catch myself and say, okay, wait a minute. Do we want to yell about this? Do we want to talk about it? Do we want to ask a question? Like, what do we want to do about this? And then it becomes the expression. When I lived primarily in my world of anger, expression was to diminish you, to take you out and smile at the same time. The harder my words were to you, the better it made me feel. That is an imbalance in the throat chakra, because expression of that level implies dominance, implies superiority, implies my version is better than yours. And every time you express that, and like I said, I still struggle to this day with demonstrating these kinds of expressions, but I'm more aware of it. So when it happens, I say, okay, my mistake happened. I'm going to own it. I'm going to work through it, and we're going to see how it comes out again next time, but we're going to be more aware. Not allowing it to put fear, not allow it to put in that doubt of I can't accomplish whatever. When I started changing the way I express, coming to people with questions wasn't so much of, did you do this? It was more of a, hey, I'm just trying to follow up. Was this taken care of? It didn't really change the question. It maybe added more words. Maybe the inflection is really all I needed to work on. But just utilizing that form of expression allowed me to identify when anger was presenting itself, which then allowed me to work through it with my system to see, is this something that I still need to be angry about? Is this something that I need to work through? Is this something that I need to let go of? And so on and so forth.
Why did it make me angry before?
Right. Why did it make me angry?
Right. And where I'm sitting at it and sitting with it now, and trying to understand that, yeah, there's all forms of expression. Our youngest is a very shy individual.
Mm-hmm.
He is the original Sprout. One of the reasons why we're doing this,
right,
is help him grow. I can see the leaps and bounds that he has done, but he's not one to always express himself. He's not one to want to express himself all the time. He gets in the shower, and oh my God, does he express himself? Does he use that throat chakra while he is showering? And it's an easy and kind of, when you can't do it because you're not there yet, right? You have to have some sort of expression. I like art. That's a good form of expression for me. I like having conversations with somebody about anything, and that's a form of expression. I'm not necessarily having to go deep and tell all my truth to somebody.
Right, where I want to tell everything.
Right, because there are certain stories that don't need to be shared at parties, okay, guys? You keep those to yourselves. But there are just going up, just having this weird conversation with people that want to talk sometimes, right? And yeah, those people that are giving too much information, but you know what? You just share a little something about yourself with them, and that already starts balancing out some of the imbalance. It doesn't take care of everything, because you need to talk your truth too. You need to be able to express the way you want to express. But there are certain times where you can't. I mean, especially if you're in the military, right? Or especially if you have a government job. Certain times you have to be able to stay very PC. Just little bits of things that have nothing to do with the color blue and nothing to do with meditating and mantra. Hey, if you need to go hike a mountain and just scream it out,
right?
That's a form of expression,
right?
It helps in some form, and you don't have to spend half an hour in your brain or in your mind for it to actually help. It does help.
Now that we've kind of dug into, identifying what part the throat chakra affects, let's talk about the actual balances, imbalances, how to recognize it, and all those fun things. So first of all, when we're using the throat chakra, we're also utilizing the breath. So we have to remember that the heart chakra is always going to be into play in this area. So one of the things that you need to look at if you have problems with restriction or not being able to express what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you're saying, what you're believing, all that kind of stuff, look back to how that beginning form of expression took place, right? When you asked your parents a question, or you asked your siblings a question, or you asked your teachers a question, did they stop it? Did they diminish it? Did they give you reasons of why your expression was not important or valid, right? And then look for the truth in that. Is it a scenario that you've created in your own mind of, this is why I wasn't allowed to express, therefore that's why I don't express? Or is it an actual occurrence that took place that you need to work on forgiveness with the heart chakra, allowing it to release through breath, right? So that's just a little tidbit there. But when we're looking at the balance chakra, we're looking for things that are going to allow us to be the most authentic version of ourselves without fear, without hesitation, and without restriction in our communication in thoughts, feelings, and the need to be heard and seen, right? Being able to take up space. But it also is part of listening. Like you mentioned earlier, creating that balance also requires you to be an active and empathetic listener. That it's going to foster honesty, creativity, and allow you to align your words with your truth. When you're having a conversation, and I used to teach this a lot when I was in accounting in businesses, clear communication within staff, right, is to allow yourselves to understand, one, what type of communication are we having? Is it a passive? Is it aggressive? Is it passive aggressive? You can keep going through the stages of communication to identify what is actually taking place. Once you identify that part, then now you can understand where it's sitting in the system. So is it something that you are feeling true with, something that you believe in, or is it something that you want to counteract? If it's a counteract, if it's the actual way of expression, then how are you going to do that? Is it going to be rude? Is it going to be condescending? Or is it going to be supportive and actually actively and empathetically listening to what the other person is going to say based off of the question or the comment that you just created?
Right, which is why the throat chakra is often imbalanced.
Right.
If you haven't gone back to look at your other chakras, or you haven't been actively using your chakras, you say stuff without thinking. You say stuff without acting because it's in your foundation. Somebody said it. It's like cussing. It's in my foundation. I can cuss with the best of them, but I have to actively work through my chakra system so I don't. When I'm at work, I can express myself in different ways that have nothing to do with cussing, right? But when I am playing sports, that goes all out the window. I have to express myself with cussing. I noticed that, even in my younger years where I was working with children, and I had to actively make sure that I did not cuss, because you don't cuss in front of kids. You just don't. And I know that, and I feel that, and I can express my way in other ways. But then I would have a sporting event or an outing or something like that, and it's like it's all out the window. I have to express myself with cussing, but it's acceptable. Even if my kids were there, even when they were little, it was acceptable. I could cuss. And your kids, your kids are always the first ones to express themselves and say, "Ooh, you said a bad word." In those moments, you didn't hear that from them.
Right. You said the B word.
Everybody was like, everybody was cussing. Everybody can cuss, and it's okay. Where in the other chakra systems is this affecting? Right? Is it the action? Do you have to do it just because you have to do it? Right? It's a desire. It's burning inside to say something rude.
Right.
Well, there's something deeper in there. Is it because that's the way you were brought up? That's who you thought you were in high school?
And let's get something clear for a second. When we're talking about this being, we don't have to be rude. Now, I'm not telling people that life is rainbows and sugar cookies and that you have to be light and love and you have to be politically correct all the time. What I'm telling you is to see how it's feeling in your system. If being rude is what works for you at that moment because you're still developing yourself, by all means, that's all you know. You cannot be, you cannot hold on to the guilt and shame of, oh shit, I was just rude to somebody. But once you become aware is when the action needs to change. Once you've realized that empathy becomes the balance in the system. So once you've realized that empathy, then you've realized that you have a responsibility to make a change for yourself, not for somebody else. You can still say what you wanted to say, maybe not in the inflection that you wanted to use.
Right. For me, it's, I hear people say, well, yeah, I know that's who I am, right? I know that I'm rude. I know that I'm condescending, and that's who I am. You will always see the imbalance in people like that because they are not willing to look at themselves and have a change. That's what works for them. Right? That's what's going to continue to work for them. But there will always be that something is missing in them, and it's because they won't change. Right? They know exactly what's wrong with them, and they won't change. And so the imbalance will always be there no matter what, because they realize that they need to change, but they won't.
And that won't we'll get into in the next chakra when we cover the third eye, the perception, because that's really where that sits. And we'll dig into that one really in depth when we come up to that area. So let me tell you real quick what it looks like for a completely out of balanced throat chakra. And you guys are going to be amazed because now all of this research I did was for through personal experience, right? it took me about 2.5 years to really utilize the information that I learned about the chakra system into physical play to see exactly where it worked, where it didn't work, what everybody was talking about, and then to get some really basic understanding so that I can apply it to my everyday life at any given time. Looking at a completely out of balance chakra is when you're feeling completely disconnected from your ability to communicate.
Like I said earlier, all of a sudden you're wanting to say something and your brain goes, whoop, and your mouth goes, and then they walk away. All of a sudden you're like, oh, that would have been such a good one.
Right. Have you ever gotten to an argument, and you're probably going to say, yeah, with you, but have you ever gotten to an argument with somebody where you are trying to basically say something in between their yelling, right? Like they're yelling at you and you're like, yeah, but, and then, So that is a completely out of balance throat chakra. And the reason for that is because you can't listen. Bottom line. When the inability to listen is present, then the throat chakra completely becomes out of balance. So remember, I mentioned in the beginning the ENT, the ears, nose, and throat, right? All of this system is connected. Therefore, it's going to work to each other's advantage and then work to each other's disadvantages. And you brought that up when you talked about the senses. When one sense goes out, the other sense activates. The other thing that sits here is the miscommunication. Now you are trying to explain your thought, explain your viewpoint, explain your stance, and instead of that, it's coming out as mumbo jumbo, past experiences, old wounds, and trauma. So you're not allowing yourself to align with what your actual truth is at that moment, what you need to convey and what needs to physically come out of that throat chakra through the breath, right? So again, when these systems get affected and they get to the point where they're completely out of balance, you're going to start noticing different types of physical ailments, right? One of them is going to be hoarseness.
Like you right now?
Like me right now. And
no, it's because it's 3.5 hours of podcasting is why.
Right. This is not an out of balance throat chakra, and I'm glad you pointed that out. This is more of, like what Jay said, an overuse of the throat chakra.
Throat chakra. It's time to rest it.
It's time to rest it. Yeah. So this is the last episode that we're recording for today so that I can go and rest this throat chakra. The other thing that starts to get affected here is the neck and the jaw. We see a lot of TMJ here, where you have that tightness in the jaw because you're either clenching or you're grinding. And dental people say what?
You're stressed.
You're stressed. Stop stressing yourself out. Stress can form itself not just in the physical form, but it can form itself in the energetic form as well, and then manifest itself into the physical form. What do we do with these systems? This goes back to the initial questions that you asked me, which was, have I ever walked away from a conversation feeling like I swallowed the truth? Absolutely. And the story that I gave you falls in line with that. But now I'm showing you a little bit more of how to dig into when you can identify it in yourself. Now, the other way of working with the system is going through the process of scenarios, right? This is where I like to tell people, do your journaling. Do your meditation, create visualizations for yourself because it activates the throat chakra.
Put yourself back in that situation, even though it hurt, because usually you're in this, when you hold your tongue or when you're not saying what you're supposed to be saying or when you're not saying your truth, it's because it was a hard conversation. Absolutely. It was a hard meeting or a hard scenario. But you need to be able to visualize that scenario. Go back and start understanding what was your part in it to be in that scenario so that next time it happens, you can come out with a different outcome, right?
Absolutely. Some of the other ways we can look at it is find what works for you. Now, these modalities that are out there, these tools for our toolboxes like mantras, humming, singing, maybe going to the top of the mountain and screaming, any of those type of things. Those are great tools for the toolbox. The other ways we can do this is maybe activating it through inviting another element. I like to tell my clients a lot that when the throat chakra gets affected, and you should maybe try to utilize the salt and the water to bring back some nutrients and cleansing into that area so that you can purify it and reprocess it for what you want next to happen with it. So that's just another fun little modality you can use or tool for your toolbox. But looking at the chakra system, we can go into it and we can dissect all kinds of different areas, the overactiveness, the underbalances, the overbalances. But in all honesty, understanding how it's balanced and how it's out of balance, those other scenarios will make its way into your system to where you completely understand how that works for you.
And until then, find a way to be able to talk your truth. Find a way that helps you express what you feel like you need to be expressing. And sometimes it's just talking to yourself. Sometimes it's coming home and going through that scenario and saying this and this and this and this and this and this is what I wanted to say to that person. Right? And then understanding that it wasn't meaning to be rude or condescending or mean in any way, but it's what you needed to express at that moment. You couldn't say it to them, but now you said it to your stuffed animal.
Right.
And if you don't have one, get one so you could say that kind of stuff to your stuffed animal.
Right.
Right? Or, there's always your dogs. They are great listeners.
Your
they
cats,
don't judge.
Your fish.
Your cats, your fish, your turtles.
I found that the turtle is the best listener.
Right. He just
looks at you through a glass plate and he's like, I don't get anything, but cool. One of the other things I'd recommend for people to do or to try in this area is to set actual boundaries for themselves without bringing in guilt. So again, if you're going to be rude to somebody and it brings you guilt, then you shouldn't have been rude, right? There was another way of conveying that message. So learning to say no to the boundaries in which you've created, right? I'm not going to allow this type of behavior to create anger within my system. That's where I started. I'm not going to allow somebody rolling their eyes to create anger into my system so that I lash out with these volatile words and energy.
Of course, if you guys been listening to our podcast from the beginning of the Chakra series, you probably already found that understanding. You probably have already understood that now that we're at the throat chakra, if you haven't filtered it through that heart chakra, right, what comes out is going to be wrong. Right? If you've only gone, because we haven't gone to the crown and third eye, so if you started from the top down, whatever comes out without filtering it through that heart chakra, it's going to be wrong. It's not going to feel right? Because you haven't been able to go all the way through. Like you said, non-negotiables start at the root. So if you haven't set boundaries for yourself, you haven't worked at the root chakra, things that come out of the throat are not going to feel right. They're going to be wrong. I'm not saying they're wrong in general. They're wrong for you.
They're just going to feel wrong in the beginning.
Feel wrong. They're going to be wrong for you. It's not going to be the right thing. Even if you've been saying it for such a long time. And my example of that is I grew up in an area where speaking a certain way and dressing a certain way was a necessity. Because if you didn't, then dire consequences, like you could be shot, could happen. Growing up that way, there were certain things you could say and certain things you didn't want to say for fear of death. So you didn't, or you acted a certain way, because if you didn't act that way, then you would get beat up.
Oh yeah, my younger me would have beat you up.
Right. If you were not cool enough.
You rolled your eyes.
Right, you rolled your eyes. Living that way and not being able to express yourself in those manners like you wanted to, you need to find some sort of other expressions, right?
Just keep in mind, I want my listeners to really, really, really take into the system, put it into the heart chakra, and really filter it and see what resonates with you. But understand that your voice is one of the most powerful tools that we have as humans. It allows us to do so much, and it allows us to destroy so much. So how are you using your throat chakra? Just use that kind of as your journaling assignment, or as your reflection question, or whatever. But how are you using the energy within your throat chakra? Are you using it for purpose? Are you using it still with fear? Are you using it with uncertainty? Are you using it with development? What are you doing with the system? And then see what it's playing out. See how that is playing out in your physical life.
Expression
Expression
is the key. Find your expression. Try to be open to the idea that you are not expressing yourself enough, one way or another. Like I was talking before, when I was younger, I wasn't allowed to express myself in certain ways because of societal rules and, you know, where I lived. When I grew up and realized I'm an adult and I can express myself in any way that I want, I started wearing the clothes that I didn't used to wear because I couldn't express myself that way. I started to act the way that I've always wanted to be able to act, but I couldn't, because if I didn't, I would be cast out of everything that was my life back then. Didn't express myself in those certain ways.
Right.
Luckily I found sports, and luckily I had, martial arts, and in those areas it was a different societal standards, and so I was able to express myself in other ways.
Right.
During those times. If it's an adult listening, if it's a teenager listening, whoever is listening, find a way that you can express yourself authentically. The more you can find ways you can express yourself authentically, even when you don't think you can, right? I'm not saying go get a tattoo and don't let your parents know because they're going to get mad at you.
Or slap it when they see it, like my mom did.
Right. For being a dumbass. I expressed myself authentically there.
I snorted.
That's another way to express yourself authentically, and use your throat. Snort.
Right.
Laugh until you snort.
Right.
Okay. Laughter is a good way of expression.
Right.
Right. Singing, like we said before, but find a way to be able to express yourself until you are more comfortable with yourself. Right? Until you can be able to express yourself in any way authentically.
Right. And then just last thing to keep in mind is expression comes in a lot of different forms. There are times when we cannot verbally express for whatever reason it is. I like to think about the stories or the journals that we read from people who were in situations that they couldn't physically voice their opinion, but they kept a record of it. They kept a record of their experiences, their thoughts, and their beliefs around it. That is another beautiful form of expression. We have to remember that expression comes in all kinds of forms. And being open and allowing people to express in the form that they know how, and supporting them when they cry out for help in actual terms, not in for what you are thinking or creating the story for them. They have to actually say they need help. They have to actually say, I need a pause. You have to give people the opportunity to express uncomfortableness as well as joy and excitement. It's got to be balanced.
Rosie,
Jay,
this was a good episode.
Thank you.
I think we did awesome. And I'm expressing that to all you guys.
Right, and I want to thank all my listeners. We've gotten some more listeners, and that's fabulous.
Everybody, every time, please express what you think about how we're doing, what we're doing. The comment sections are always on here in our recording, so that you guys can please comment on rosebud&sprout.com.
Yeah, you have a story, you want to share a thought, or you want to even let us in on your journey and tell us how the system is working for you and how what you've learned or didn't learn or whatever. Just shoot us an email at rosebud&sprout@gmail.com. We're happy to hear your stories, and maybe if
we would love to make it into a podcast.
Yeah, we could feature it.
If you guys you haven't heard the podcast just before this, it all stemmed between conversations, comments, concerns of what our lives are starting to become, or what they may become. Anyways, it all stemmed from comments and conversations that we have had with our listeners and just in our lives in general.
So
we are wanting to make these meaningful episodes in hopes that it helps us.
It helps us develop ourselves.
I know, right? I keep saying words like people and persons, but it helps us all just elevate, put us in the same vibrational field as together, so that we can understand where we are all headed. Long goodbyes to all. We love you.
We honor you.
We thank you so much for listening.
We value and we see you.
And as always, take care and keep blooming.
Home, 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 home.